Welcome to the first installment of Abyss 101. I'm Dire Raven, and in this initial episode, we'll take a quick look into what exactly Abyssal Deadspace is, how to go about getting there, as well as the mechanics of it. Running Abyssals can be fun and profitable, but it is very important that pilots grasp the core mechanics involved, as unlike most PvE combat in EVE, failure means the certain loss of both your ship and your pod. Even if you're a veteran capsuleer, I encourage you to stick around. I have seen newbros and experienced pilots alike struggle with this particular type of PvE, and rightfully so. It can be as challenging as it is rewarding. Our topic is broad, so let's get started. Abyssal Deadspace was added to the game in the Into the Abyss expansion that went live May 29th, 2018. It was further expanded in the Onslaught expansion that was released on the 13th of November 2018, and again in the Depths of the Abyss update on the 15th of September 2020. It's a mysterious area of isolated space which players can enter to try to complete time-limited PvE combat challenges to obtain lucrative rewards. Abyssal filaments can be obtained from data sites, from Abyssal Deadspace itself, from daily login rewards, or purchased directly from the in-game market. 7 tiers of increasing difficulty exists, numbered 0 through 6. Entry into the Abyss is limited to either a single Tech 1, Tech 2, Navy faction, Pirate faction cruiser, up to 2 destroyers at the cost of 2 filaments, and up to 3 frigates at the cost of 3 filaments. Tech 3 strategic cruisers cannot enter this site. To enter the Abyss, activate the filaments while in space. When activated, a beacon named Abyssal Trace is created at your entry location. If a frigate or destroyer Abyssal Trace is opened, only a fleet can activate it. The Abyssal Trace can be scanned down using combat probes, which means that sufficiently motivated players might be able to find it and await your return from the pocket. To keep the Abyssal Trace more secure, most players activate their filaments at safe spot bookmarks, but again, they can be scanned down by pirates with combat scanner probes. This means that you will have to consider where you use the filament, especially in low security and null security space. Even in high security space, you should be cautious. It is best to activate the filament at a safe spot bookmark, preferably more than directional scanner range, which is 14.3 AU, away from any celestial and any frequently warped routes. Experienced Abyssal runners find large systems where they can set up such bookmarks and replace their bookmarks frequently. You will be invulnerable for a short time when you leave the Abyss. If you leave the Rift and find yourself being camped, pause to assess your best options. Stay calm. One survival tactic is to quickly activate a new filament, but players who know you can do this will anchor a mobile depot nearby, preventing filament activation. Based on your assessment of the situation, you will have to decide what to do next. When the Abyss was created, the pockets were designed for a single cruiser. However, later updates allowed the Abyss to be entered with fleets of either 3 frigates or 2 destroyers. Entering the Abyss as a fleet of small ships requires 2 or 3 of the appropriate filaments of the same type in a single ship's cargo hold. All ships in the group must be in the same fleet. The pilot of the ship carrying the filaments can use them and select the Activate for Fleet option. Doing so will consume the filaments, and rather than pulling the ship into the Abyss, it will open a limited use acceleration gate that leads to the Abyss. Fleet members can then activate the acceleration gate and launch themselves into the Abyss. The 20-minute timer is shared by all ships in the fleet and starts counting down when the first ship finishes activating the acceleration gate and enters the Abyssal pocket. To compensate for the increased filament consumption and the loot being split across 2 or 3 ships and pilots, the biocombinative cache found in multi-ship pockets contains significantly more loot than the ordinary bioadaptive cache. Players are not required to do 2-ship or 3-ship Abyssals in 2 or 3 ships. One tactic used by experienced Abyssal runners is to activate 3 filaments for 3 ships, significantly boosting the available loot, and then run the resulting pockets alone. Since the pockets will be balanced for 3 ships, not 1, this requires careful planning and fitting and is not for the faint of heart. It does, however, markedly increase the profits made by successful runners. Abyssal filaments cannot be activated in 1.0 or 0.9 space. Triggering an abyssal filament in high security space can also trigger a suspect timer. This is based on the filament tier and the security of the system. In a 0.8 system, Tier 4, Tier 5, and Tier 6 filament activation will give you a suspect timer. In a 0.7 system, activating a Tier 5 or Tier 6 filament will give you a suspect timer. And of course, in a 0.6 security system, only the activation of a Tier 6 filament will give you the suspect timer. The suspect timer begins upon exit of the dead space pocket, so the timer does not run out while running the site. Finally, in a 0.5 system, you can activate any tier of the abyssal filaments and not be penalized with a suspect timer. Now let's talk a bit about the layout of the Abyssal Deadspace. An Abyssal Deadspace instance is composed of 3 pockets, sometimes called rooms by players. Each pocket contains enemies and a gate to the next pocket, called the transfer conduit. The gate only unlocks once all enemies in the pocket are cleared. The enemies in the pocket are randomly selected from a range of spawns appropriate to the tier of the filament used. Higher tier filaments take you to pockets with more dangerous enemies. Some pockets may contain enemies who are in combat against each other. However, none of these factions will be allied with you. You must fight your own way out. We will look at the enemies more in depth in a later video. Abyssal NPCs leave no wrecks to loot or salvage. The Dead Space instance is stable for only 20 minutes. If you are still in the pocket after 20 minutes, your ship and your pod will immediately be destroyed. You must clear the 3 pockets and exit within the allocated time. The 3rd pocket gate, which will be labeled Origin Conduit, returns you to the location in space where you activated the filament. To finish the Abyssal run within 20 minutes limit, you must achieve a faster average pocket clear time of 6.66 minutes. Each pocket is surrounded by dangerous space, which will destroy your ship and pod if you enter it. Often entering this area is known as going out of bounds. The space appears as a red graphical effect that looks a lot like a laser grid, which becomes more obvious the closer you fly towards it. You certainly want to avoid this at all costs. Each pocket also contains a structure called the Triglavian Bioadaptive Cache, which has a scant 300 hit points and, once destroyed, drops some of the loot for that pocket. In all except for the easiest, Tier 0 Abyssals, there are also Triglavian extraction nodes and Triglavian extraction subnodes, which also contain additional loot. Cache wrecks can be salvaged for Triglavian materials, though the time and ISK efficiency for doing this is dubious, especially given the time limit on the run. Some other restrictions you should probably be aware of are as follows. Fleet mates cannot warp to you while you are within the abyss, nor can you warp out of it. You cannot cloak. You cannot deploy a mobile depot. There is no local chat channel. If you start a probe scan with core probes and combat probes, probes will take damage when they move outside of the pocket boundaries and will soon be destroyed as they have low structure HP. The directional scanner will not work. The map will not work. However, if a player is in Abyssal Deadspace when the server downtime occurs, the player will return to the solar system from which they entered. Any drones must be recovered before the server goes down, or they will be lost. Each Abyssal Deadspace site will have one of 5 pairs of weather effects comprised of 1 bonus and 1 penalty. These effects are intrinsic to success as they are highly impactful. It is important to note that since both of the bonuses and penalty components of any weather applies to all entities, the bonus can end up being a bonus to the player or a penalty to the player by virtue of being a bonus to the enemy. And similarly, vice versa with the penalty component. Not every bonus is impactful in every situation, and the same goes for penalties. So it is critical to consider these effects when planning a ship fleet build, strategies, and tactics. The bonus and penalty effects found in each of the 5 weathers are as follows. Electrical has a penalty of -30, 50, 70% EM resist, and a bonus of -50% capacitor recharge time. Exotic filaments have a penalty of -30, 50, or 70% kinetic resist, and a bonus of +50% scan resolution. Firestorm filaments have a penalty of -30, 50, or 70% thermal resist, and a bonus of +50% armor HP. Gamma filaments have a penalty of -30, 50, or 70% explosive resist, and a bonus of +50% shield HP. Dark filaments have a penalty of -30, 50, 70% turret optimal and fall-off range, and a bonus of +50% maximum velocity. Now what I mean by -30, 50, or 70% is that the strength of the penalty found in a given site is determined by a random roll between either 30 or 50% through Tier 3, and a roll between 50% and 70% in Tier 4 and above. Resistance penalties in all weathers except for Dark will increase the amount of damage taken in the damage type of the resistance penalty. These penalties are addressed by covering this hole in your ship's tank and ensuring that you are putting out damage that matches this resistance hole as closely as possible. By foregoing the resist hole, one is choosing to fight against the natural resistances of the NPCs just as one would in Dark weather, which lacks a resistance penalty. Turret optimal and fall-off penalties in the Dark filaments not only applies to NPCs and player turrets, but player drone turrets. Therefore, it is inadvisable to bring turret or drone boats to these sites, and to use launchers instead. Additionally, missiles, lack of navigation requirements for the purposes of damage application, enable the player to more easily and better take advantage of the maximum velocity bonus found in this weather. This penalty will dramatically reduce the amount of tank requirements and damage taken by players, due to the NPCs not correcting the reduced range. They will fire on you from outside of optimal and often even outside of 1 times fall off or more, and they will consistently miss. Finally, this penalty means that there is no resist penalty, and therefore there is no resist hole to attack. This weather will require more damage output than most others, save potentially Firestorm. In electrical filaments, the capacitor recharge time bonus effectively grants not a 50% bonus but rather 100%, as it halves capacitor recharge time, therefore doubling the capacitor recharge rate. NPCs receive essentially no benefit from this bonus, but players are able to leverage the additional capacitor regen to great effect. As for the Firestorm's armor hit point bonus, this bonus is the opposite of what is found in electrical sites in a way. It is usually not relevant to player ships, only in certain cases, and is highly impactful to the enemies, as many enemies you will encounter in these sites are armor heavy. This will dramatically increase the time to kill for each individual enemy, thereby keeping threats on the field longer and increasing overall sight time. The hit point bonus on the player's ship can be relevant to players running destroyers and frigates to some degree, though is largely unimpactful for players using cruisers. Firestorm is generally known as the most difficult weather filament. As far as your shield hit point bonus in gammas, while most enemies are armor heavy and some lack shield entirely, There is more than enough shield HP present for this to present a time challenge compared to sites without a hit point bonus, though less of a challenge than the Firestorm. In terms of player leveraging this bonus, players are able to utilize and increase shield regeneration that comes along with the increased hit points, building passive shield regeneration tanks that can handle massive amounts of damage. NPC shields found here generally are designed to effectively not regenerate whatsoever, and thus do not gain a notable amount of regen from this bonus. And as for the scan resolution bonus and exotics, it's largely irrelevant, but be aware that NPCs will lock you faster, and you can enjoy locking the NPCs faster. While all of this is a lot to take in, keep in mind that there is a lot of loot to be gathered and ISK to be earned. As you begin your adventure of progressing through ships, fits, and ultimately tiers of abyssal sites, you will naturally become accustomed to the different aspects of the abyss. If a tier 6 run is your Carnegie Hall, then you know how to get there. Practice. Start small and cheap and work your way up. In the next episode, we'll take a look at fitting your first abyssal runner, setting up your safe place to activate your abyssal filament, and jumping into your first run. Until then, fly safe, Capsuleer.